Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate on the Children Withdrawal from Religious Education and Amendment of UNCRC Compatibility Duty Scotland Bill at Stage 1. It is now time to move on to the next item of business. The next item of business is a debate on motion 19890 in the name of Graham Day on the Non-Domestic Rates Liability for Unoccupied Properties Scotland Bill Emergency Bill motion. I remind members that as per Rule 11.3.1 small h close brackets of standing orders, the question on this motion will be put immediately after the debate. So I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Minister Graham Day to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, in 2020 the Scottish Parliament voted to devolve empty property relief to local authorities to provide greater local fiscal empowerment to councils. This came into force on the 1st of April 2023. However, it was recently identified that the Government amendment to the Non-Domestic Rates Bill in December 2019, which repealed legislation from 1966 to give effect to this, contained an error. This amendment,
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. He said it was recently identified. Can you tell us how recent?
Minister.
I'm more than happy to do that, Presiding Officer. In August of 20... Well, if the member would allow me to...
Minister, please resume your seat. Second. We're not proceeding like that. We're going to hear the person who's got the floor, and then we're going to call the next person, and everybody else is going to listen to them with courtesy and respect. Minister.
Officer, as I said, in August of this year, a query was raised with the Scottish Government. This was investigated, and on mid-September it was identified that there was indeed an issue. Since then, Scottish Government officials have worked at pace to develop this remedial legislation. Once finalised and completed internally, it was introduced to Parliament at the soonest opportunity, with business managers last Thursday informed ahead of publication on Monday. I explained to Mr Ross that under parliamentary process that is quite a rapid exercise. I will give way.
Douglas Ross.
I mean, I don't think it's rapid. I don't think people outside this building would think that a government finding out about a major flaw in their own legislation in the summer, bringing emergency legislation in the last week of November, is rapid. Therefore, could I ask the Minister, how would the government view amendments to this bill, if it does go through as emergency legislation, for the government to publish all evidence, all details, all written and email communications about this bill, so we can see that it was being treated as an emergency and hasn't been added in the week of the UK Government budget to try and hide it from other stories?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, this is a serious matter, and I think it would be a matter of regret for this Parliament to have the process clouded by conspiracy theories of the type that Mr Ross is seeking to advance. Presiding Officer, this amendment did not indubitably have the intended legal effect, and it appears that there had in fact been no certain legal basis to charge rates on the owners of unoccupied non-domestic properties since that date. This bill seeks to correct that legislative error and give effect to the original policy intent and bring matters into line with the position as understood by local authorities and ratepayers. I will give way one final time to Mr Simpson. Sorry, my apologies.
Graham Simpson.
Can the Minister say who raised it with the Government?
Minister.
I'm not in possession of the exact detail. What I can say is that a query was raised by a local authority who then raised the query with the Scottish Government. That's the detail that I can offer him at the moment. I hope that's of some help to him. The process that we're following will ensure there is a clear and certain legal basis for local authorities to collect non-domestic rates from the owners of unoccupied properties, and it will bring the statute book into line with the position both as understood by local authorities and ratepayers and applied by local authorities and as voted on by Parliament in 2019. Without this bill, local authorities may decide the rates paid by owners of unoccupied property since 1st April 2023 need to be refunded, and rates could no longer be collected on unoccupied properties going forwards. The bill seeks to protect revenue already collected in line with the Scottish Parliament vote and subsequent budget bills. If this bill is not passed, those who paid rates on unoccupied properties will likely receive an unexpected and unjustified refund of rates paid since the 1st of April 2023. That could require cuts to public spending or a significant increase in rates in the future to make up for this loss. The sums that may be at stake would fall to Scottish Government and are estimated to be over £100 million per year if local authorities decided they had to repay the rates collected on those properties and, of course, then cease collection going forward. There will be no change to rates bills as a result of this legislation, and the bill, if it were passed, would not introduce any additional new costs to businesses or individuals compared to the Scottish Parliament's original intended policy. I am therefore seeking the Chamber's support today for this bill to be taken as an emergency piece of primary legislation. Subject to that support, Stage 1 would take place tomorrow afternoon and Stages 2 and 3 would take place on Thursday afternoon. Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. Could I just ask you to move your motion?
And I move.
Thank you. I now call on Craig Hoy. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. What the Government is asking us to do today is to set aside concerns about transparency, legitimacy and competence, and I don't think we should be prepared to do so when such a significant sum of public money is in play. Now, I've been an MSP for just over 4 years, but a political journalist since 1996, and I have seen my fair share of SNP incompetence, but this latest fiasco possibly tops it all. Let us explain to the paying public exactly what nationalist ministers are asking us to rush through today under this emergency procedure. The SNP government, backed by the Labour Party, passed legislation in 2020 reforming business rates. We said at the time that it would lead to increased tax burden for businesses, and we were right. However, it turns out that this legislation was even more shoddy than the SNP minister who introduced the bill at the time. The minister was the disgraced Derek Mackay, the same minister who botched the award of the 2 ferries. But then it fell to Kate Forbes, who completed the bill in its final stages after Mr Mackay left government. This legislation was meant to allow SNP ministers to levy business rates on companies that owned unoccupied properties, even if there was a legitimate reason for that property lying empty, such as the building not being fit for purpose, or, as is increasingly the case in areas such as Aberdeen, where the loss of jobs in sectors such as oil and gas means there is nobody left to fill those offices and firms are falling into administration. But what ministers did not realise at the time, despite the ever-increasing numbers of civil servants and the army of bureaucrats that support them, is that this legislation was incompetently drafted. It was deficient, much like much of this government does. I will give way.
Mason.
Would the member accept that he's somewhat over-egging this, that there is a slight... that everyone makes slight administrative mistakes, and this is not a major issue?
Craig Hoy.
I think Mr Mason may have left the party, but he's still an apologist for the administration. What we are talking about here is £400 million being illegitimately taken from struggling businesses in order to help fill the SNP's coffers. Now, I think we have to be aware that there could potentially be legal challenges even to this legislation. The government clearly made a mistake. It disregarded the legislative requirements laid down in the Valuation and Rating Scotland Act of 1956. It was an act completely overlooked by this government as it sought to mount yet another cash grab on businesses and property owners. Now, what we do know now is that this government found out in August that there was a problem with this legislation, but it chose not to tell anyone. No secret. Now, I think I looked through here, and it's like an episode of Yes Minister, Deputy Presiding Officer. The civil service jargon says the amendments made by the 2020 Act to devolve EPR had not had the intended legal effect. To use plain English, this SNP government simply cocked up. Their legislation provided no legal basis for companies to be paying business rates on unoccupied properties over 3 budgetary years. And as the Minister said, this amounts now to £400 million. And in good faith, businesses across Scotland will have been paying these non-domestic rates on unoccupied properties, rates that they should not have been paying. And this is not, Minister, a trivial amount of money, and this is not a trivial issue. Now, that £400 million could have in the interim being used to support businesses to invest in jobs and in growth, and that has not been happening. So I will give way to the Minister.
Minister.
I've listened with interest to Craig Hoy's comments, but there's a question for Craig Hoy. Recognising the significant sums of money, what is his party going to do? Are they going to resist this approach to fix the problem? Are they going to act responsibly? Which is it?
Craig Hoy.
Well, I'm going to hold the Minister and the Government to account, but I'm also going to ask for more transparency and more scrutiny so that this Government does not repeat the mistake it is presently trying to fix. Because having messed up once already, this Government is now seeking permission from this Parliament to rush a piece of legislation through to cover a mistake entirely of its own making. Now, as opposition MSPs, we do not have an army of civil servants at our disposal to produce amendments at short notice. We don't have dozens of spin doctors like the SNP government has to create a smokescreen. But we need time to scrutinise this legislation. It was only published yesterday by the SNP government, and they now want it passed in 2 days. They are using the distraction of the UK budget as a smokescreen to cover for their own incompetence. But worse still, they are trying to fix rushed legislation with rushed legislation. And given the Scottish Government's track record, we believe there should be much more scrutiny of this bill, because how do we know that this will not make the situation worse? Now, John Swinney's government wants to pass an emergency law to keep £400 million that it took from businesses but was not legally entitled to take. Now, I recognise this creates financial pressures that the Scottish Government's incompetence has brought on itself, and pressures that could add to the pressures felt by local government too. So let me ask the Government a few questions that they may want to either respond in writing or find a means to respond today. Given that we're being asked to pass emergency legislation, could the Government confirm that it has taken sound legal advice on the competency of this legislation, and if so, is it watertight? What is the Scottish Government's assessment of the likely success of any legal challenge that may be initiated against this new legislation? Because my understanding from speaking to stakeholders today is that several property owners are now actively giving consideration to doing so. But most importantly, does the Minister think that it is right for businesses and Scotland's councils to pay the price for the SNP's incompetence? And for these reasons, we cannot support the use of emergency powers, and even if passed, we cannot support the timetable for this bill, which is a direct result of SNP incompetence, and which reflects the fact that we need significantly more scrutiny and transparency, not just from the SNP in relation to this bill, but in its general dealings with this Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. I now call on Martin Whitfield. Up to 5 minutes, please.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. Today we're being invited to agree the non-domestic rates liability for unoccupied properties Scotland Bill be treated as an emergency bill and considered under accelerated timetable. The bill is necessary because of a legislative error in the Non-Domestic Rates Scotland Act 2020, which inadvertently, according to the Government record, removed the legal basis for charging non-domestic rates on unoccupied properties. And we've heard in the debate so far almost a dispute as to what should and shouldn't happen and who should and should not be responsible. And these are genuine arguments and the genuine questions that need to be answered. But what we are presented with is a piece of defective legislation which, since it's passed, everyone had one understanding of what it achieved, but actually the legal understanding is different. And the Parliament is being asked, as an emergency bill, to repair that small error. Now, that is not to excuse, not to look at, not to explore why the error occurred in the first place. And indeed, we've faced in this Parliament a number of challenges over the competency of legislation, and yet we've also heard on a number of occasions an urge to cut debate time so that it can't be explored. So maybe there is something that we all need to look at. At the simplest level, happy to give way.
Thank Mr Whitfield for giving way. Can he, does he have any suggestions as to why this week of all weeks this Government would choose to bring forward this bill?
Martin Wakefield.
I'm grateful for the intervention, but quite frankly, that knowledge lies outside of my knowledge. Because at its simplest level, we're just trying to restore Parliament's original intention. It's not introducing any new costs, it's not changing policy, it is seeking a continuity and to create a legal certainty. However, the challenge is that this is retrospective nature legislation. And retrospective legislation should always remain exceptional because the challenge is the fundamental principle of legal certainty, the idea that people should know what the law is before acting. And applying new rules to past actions risks unfairness, undermines the trust in Parliament and actually potentially, as we've heard from over the way, invite challenges both on human rights basis but on others. So I'm happy to
Douglas Ross.
Martin Whitfield is rightly speaking about the interpretation of this legislation. Where has that interpretation been since August, when the government first found out about it, and yesterday, when they laid the bill? Surely we need absolute clarity and transparency on that. And therefore, can I ask, if this bill does proceed and we have amendments at stage 2, would the Labour Party support amendments, if I were to lodge amendments, for the government to release all documents and correspondence around this?
Martin Wakefield.
I thank the member for the intervention. I think there needs to be an absolute level of transparency and understanding. And I would say not necessarily or even for any party political reasons, but there needs to be an understandable or honest narrative as how we got there. I'm not entirely convinced they sit within amendments to a bill, I must say, but the call for it, absolutely, that rests with the presiding officer. But certainly I think there needs to be an explanation, and one of the things that I will be calling absolutely for is cooperation, and that's cooperation across this chamber because of the importance of this nature. It is a very tight, very short bill that seeks to rectify a problem, but there must be the transparency that's being asked for about how the error occurred and how we can ensure it doesn't go further or indeed is reciprocated in any future legislation, because this is yet another error that has occurred, and we need to restore the reputation of this Parliament and indeed the Scottish Government in passing competent legal legislation. We will support the motion here tonight. We will support it because we believe this does fit the emergency descriptions as required in standing orders and needs to be passed swiftly so that we have the clarity that is required both inside and outside of this place. I'm grateful, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call on Lorna Slater.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I do not intend to use my full time. The Scottish Greens understand the need for this bill and the proposed timetable. The Scottish Greens will be supporting the motion this evening.
Thank you. I now call on Graham Day to wind up to 4 minutes, Minister.
Presiding Officer, I will be equally concise. I'd like to call on members to support this motion to bring as quickly as possible the law fully into alignment with the position as intended by Parliament and the system universally understood and operated in practice since the 1st of April 2023. We must maintain the credibility of the tax and protect public finances, and the bill will do this by clarifying the legislative position as quickly as possible.
Point of order, Douglas Ross.
I understood, Presiding Officer, you called on Graham Day, the Minister, to wind up the debate. The Minister is repeating his pre-prepared remarks. There have been serious questions raised across the chamber, and I wondered if we are going to get an opportunity to hear from the Minister his response to these concerns. If this is an emergency, if there is urgency, we deserve a Minister that's going to respond to a 15-minute debate.
Thank you, Mr Ross. As members will be aware, the content of members' contributions is a matter for the member themselves. That concludes the debate. The Minister has concluded. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you. That concludes the debate on the Non-Domestic Rates Liability for Unoccupied Property Scotland Bill, Emergency Bill motion, and we move straight to the question on that debate. And the question is that motion 19890, in the name of Graham Day, on the Non-Domestic Rates Liability for Unoccupied Properties Scotland Bill, Emergency Bill motion, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.